So, are we ready? Everyone, now we all feel, my mom was like, I think I'll only breathe air from now on. I don't know what to eat. I don't know what to put in my body, all these different things. But it's so good because I think now this is a perfect time for this session because we have all these different things and now we're going to make them come together. And so one of the most beneficial things is that we've come together and now have to realize we have a lot of choices. And you know that expression, ignorance is bliss, right? We didn't know, and so we could do whatever we want. Now we know, so it's on us to make the decisions on what's best to care for our body and soul alike. And so to a certain extent, we do have to realize that if we didn't know, okay, we didn't know. But if we do know, and we continue to go down that path, in a way, it could set us up to damaging our health. And caring for health is something that we are called to do through the ancient Christian tradition. Caring for body and soul alike is something that has just been something that has been passed down. We've been taught in Scripture by the holy saints, so on and so forth. Now, before I get into the nuts and bolts of this session, I was asked some brief questions, and I know we're going to have a question and answer period, but it kind of ties into what we just talked about. So one was in regards to Marcia's excellent presentation about what our foods come in, what we put our foods in, what we put on our body. The subject of BPA was brought up. And like she was mentioning, a lot of the cans are lined with BPA, all the soda cans, things of this nature. We know this. But now what's happening is because the word's getting out, the more the word gets out, then the companies, a lot of times they know this stuff and they don't want to change until they have to change. An example is with trans fats. When trans fats started to get a really bad rap that it's worse for our blood cholesterol than saturated fat, it was just, you know, kept hush-hush. But then, when the word started to get out to us, companies are like, the consumers know, let's change our ingredients. And so that's kind of what's been happening with BPA. BPA has not been mandatory to be out of our cans and things of this nature, but now that it's getting a lot of hype and people are knowing that it's bad, some companies are on their own changing the lining of their cans. And there are lots of companies that are trying to do research to make cans be BPA-free. And so I've actually noticed this happening more and more. And because it's not mandatory, it's on the company if they want to share that with you or not. Now, of course, they're probably going to take out the BPA, but what other 3 things are they going to put in that we are going to, are going to learn are bad for our health? But at least I just wanted to kind of bring it to the attention that, again, it's kind of like what Marcia was doing. She was showing you that we have choices as consumers. And the more we're buying the stuff that supports our health, the more the stuff is going to be able to be produced. So when we're supporting traditional farmers doing, organic farming and traditional methods of farming, then it's going to allow more farmers to go back to those ways because there's a supply and demand thing going on. So some of the cans now are saying BPA-free. And I noticed that with the garbanzo beans I bought recently, and that was an exciting moment. Now, the other thing is sugar. And it just got mentioned that sugar, is doing a whole host of all these things we don't want it to do. But again, it doesn't mean we can't have it. It's all about having it in balance. Because as soon as we say, no more sugar, that's it, what's going to happen? We're probably going to eat twice as much just as a result of that deprivation factor that's created. So it's all about having it in balance. And right now with nutrition policy and legislation, they're hoping to get additive sugars put on the food label. Because a lot of times, like I was mentioning, if you're eating something like a maple-flavored yogurt, yogurt contains sugar naturally. It contains lactose, which is it's a natural sugar. So how do I figure out how much maple syrup is in here and how much lactose sugar is in here? I study this stuff and I'm still confused, right? So for just the general public, hoping to see right under sugars, additive sugars be listed. So again, we can use that World Health Organization's recommendation and stay as low as possible under 6 teaspoons a day. Like I said, I think they're being really generous with that. But you can still have a half a cup of ice cream every once in a while and be only 2 teaspoons. So the thing is until that happens, until additive sugars is posted, there's a trick that you can do, okay? And this is going to give you an estimation. Actually, we'll use a can of soda. Now I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm going to try to do math in front of everyone. But we look, and we see 39 grams of high fructose corn syrup, which we didn't even get into all the nitty and gritty about that. But like I said, I could talk for 7 hours about this, so we had to kind of limit it. But 39 grams of sugar in this product, okay? Your magic number is always 4. So if you divide 4 into 39, so let's say 40, make it easier. 4 goes into 40 10 times. 10. So that means there's 10 teaspoons of sugar in here. So in 1 teaspoon of sugar, there's 4 grams of sugar, okay? And so every time you want to know the equivalent to how many teaspoons of sugar is in a product, just divide the grams per serving by 4. So, like I said, with this yogurt I was showing you earlier, this is the maple syrup flavored yogurt. There's 21 grams of sugar, okay? Now you divide that by 4, and you get kind of close to it. What I did was I subtracted the amounts of sugar that was just in plain yogurt to get you the exact calculation, but at least it's giving you a close amount, okay? So hopefully that'll get posted soon because it's going to make it just easier for us to shop. We see 3 teaspoons of added sugar in something, and then we're like, whoa, that's way too much. But until that happens, that's a simple guideline. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the whole meat thing. So this is good. It's been brought up over and over and over again that we need to limit our meat consumption, and when we're choosing our meat products as much as possible, we want to choose the grass-fed. Now again, the nutritional composition of grass-fed meat in comparison to corn-fed meat, it's so different. You know, God created cows to eat grass. I always said, if God created us to eat grass, we'd have to eat all day long, right? But we weren't created to eat grass, but cows were. So they should be grazing all day long. We changed their diets. That changed the nutrient composition of meat. So if we're choosing grass-fed beef more often than not, if we're limiting our meat choices, like the sodium nitrate, the nitrate-free salami that I showed you earlier, and having it every once in a while, then even if the price is a little higher right now, okay, we're not eating it as frequently. We're not eating it as much. And so it's going to be a cost-effective thing for us to do. We're going to take it one step further and look at the actual portions consumed at a meal. But I think, again, that's where we look at holy tradition. We're called to fast. And, you know, my husband and I always look at our food bills when we're fasting, and we're like, wow, we save a lot of money. No alcohol, no dairy, no meats. So you can kind of see how that balance works out. We're fasting a lot. And so we have some extra money when we're going to buy our meats to choose the higher quality meats. And I tell people, you know, if you really think about what goes into producing beef, do you think that should be a cheap food? I mean, we raise cattle. We're taking care of them for years. We slaughter them. There's this whole, the packaging, the whole thing goes on. We can't expect that to be a cheap food. So certain foods that we should be eating in limited quantities should have a higher ticket price on them. Same thing with the dairy that Marcia was discussing. You're choosing organic dairy, it might be a bit more. But again, when we were talking about the milk, when we talk about consuming a low-fat diet, we're not saying go out there and buy all these man-made alternatives, the fat-free yogurts and things like this. To eat a low-fat diet, still eat the full fat, the way God presented us the food, but have less of it. When you're eating less of a full-fat food, you're essentially still eating a low-fat diet. But you're controlling the amount of fat you intake, which is keeping the fat at a moderate rate. Make sense? Okay, good. Okay, so those were just some things that I wanted to highlight, and that leads us into this idea of change. So we've learned a lot of things today, and maybe some of us are starting to think, there are some things that I need to change to make myself care for my body so that it's being an aid to the soul, like we saw St. Seraphim of Sarov teaching us a few hours ago. So the realization that we need to change is the first start, I believe, to making health changes. If we realize we have to change, this is what is going to help us turn to repentance. And when we hear the word repentance in holy, ancient, and Orthodox tradition, we see this as a beautiful thing. We are choosing to get rid of something that we don't want to do anymore. We are choosing to make a whole 180 turn around from an action we were doing to something else. So in a way, it's a blessing of the church that we can celebrate the sacrament of confession and work on constant repentance and use that as our first step to bettering our health. Do not be surprised that you fall every day. Do not give up, but stand your ground courageously, and the angel who guards you will honor your patience. So no one here has been saying that we're all going to be perfect, right? We're going to fall. But what do we do when we fall? We get back up. And so we might say, okay, I've realized I've been doing this for my health. I haven't been walking. You know, these 10-minute walks, I hear it all the time. It's good, but I don't do it. That's okay. You might have a day that you probably should have taken a walk and you didn't. Next day, you get up, you take that walk. So the first step in developing a good habit is starting with repentance. St. John Chrysostom teaches us, habit is a difficult thing. It is hard to break, and it is hard to avoid. Therefore, the more you understand the power of the habit, the more you should endeavor to be rid of the bad habit and change yourself over to a good one. And so, interestingly enough, we see this teaching that change is not going to be easy, right? But the thing is that we know with our faith that the struggle is a good thing. And our Heavenly Father is only there to help us. He only wants to help us with these changes that we're continually trying to make. Winston Churchill teaches that to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. So we are going to look at our struggles as a way to deepen our theosis, to again connect with God, to be in communion with God. And so today we want to start with some self-examination. And so right now, like I said, you've been intaking a lot of information. Maybe there's something specific that you're recognizing that you need to focus on. We wanted to have this session kind of on mindful eating. And so think of why, how, and what you are eating. So many different things are going on. Distracted eating, right? I mean, even just driving in Chicago. I mean, people are brushing their teeth, they're eating a bowl of oatmeal, they're texting as they're driving, right? So that bowl of oatmeal, I don't know if they're paying much attention to it if they're doing those other three things. But we see it all the time. We're eating at our office desks, we're chasing the children and trying to eat the last 2 bites of our sandwich, so on and so forth. Portion sizes have grown. And as we've seen over and over and over again, when we are intaking more calories than our body's needs, it can increase our triglyceride levels that put us at risk for heart disease. It can increase our cancer risk. It sets off inflammation paths. So we have to bring our body into balance. But you know as well as I know, portions are just out of control at some of these restaurants. I always think, like, if someone comes from another country and they go to one of our restaurants and they order a portion, I wonder how many times they're like, oh no, I ordered wrong. They think they ordered family style, and we're like, no, that is just for you. No, you didn't order family style. I wonder how often that probably happens. So another thing, stressy eating. We learned some wonderful techniques today to help us in reducing stress. So much research shows that increased cortisol increases food cravings. Carbohydrates and fats are more desired when your cortisol levels are up. There's biochemical reactions that take place. So we have to manage our stress because a lot of times that leads to wanting to eat for the wrong reasons. And like we mentioned earlier, the sugar bomb has gone off and the additives and preservatives that are in so many of our foods have to be controlled. So we first want to kind of examine what we're doing with our food choices. Have we been focusing a lot on many of the fake foods? Are we really focusing on probably leaving the meal feeling overly stuffed versus just satisfied, and so on and so forth? All that exists is God's gift to man. It all exists to make God known to man, to make man's life communion with God. It is divine love made food, made life for man. You know, this, For the Life of the World, this book by Father Alexander Schmemann, it's just filled with nuggets of wisdom in regards to our relationship with this gift of creation that God has given us. And I wanted to just read you a short part of it because I really think it helps to shape what our relationship with food and diet and exercise and just lifestyle in general should look like. So this is taken from that book. When we see the world as an end in itself, everything becomes of value and consequently loses all value. Because only in God is found the meaning and value of everything in this world. Only when things are present with God is when the sacrament of God's presence is there. Things treated merely as things in themselves destroy themselves because only in God do they have life. The world of nature, cut off from its source, is a dying world. And in his book, he goes on to explain, if we just look at eating, if we just look at eating fats and carbs and micronutrients and macronutrients, and we look at eating as a story problem, then we're just kind of eating something that if we left it out on the shelf, it's going to die. But if we look at when we eat, at a time to commune with the divine, to be with God, to have this break in the day, to just experience these taste buds. I always tell people we have taste buds, not stomach buds, but our foods sometimes fly down so fast we think our taste buds are in our stomach. But we just have this gift of being able to taste food and experience God through our senses. I always refer to Bishop John because he was such an influential part of my life when I started doing this work. And he explained, he said, you know, Rita, the only reason we were given our senses was to commune with the divine. That's it. That's the only reason we have them. So you even see that relative to when we're eating. Because the sense of smell, the sense of taste, even the sense of touch are so involved in the eating process. And so we have a choice today to look at eating in two different ways. We can look at eating simply just feeding the machine. Those molecules are going in and they're coming out, right? They're doing something in and they're coming out. We can look at eating just simply feeding the machine. Or we can look at eating as a way, as a time to commune with Christ. To, again, use this act of eating, like St. Paul tells us, every single act, everything we do should be an act to glorify God, to be with God. So today, let's look at eating as a way and a time to commune with God. So we're going to start by looking at a way to set ourselves up to do this. And in Holy Orthodox tradition, in just the ancient tradition, we have been taught to pray, right? And there are many different times we should pray. We should be actually praying at all times. But we have been taught, and it's been passed down, to pray before meals. And many of us are really good at that. I have a funny story about this, and I'll share it with you in a second. But Holy Christian tradition also teaches us that we should pray after a meal. And I think you see this taking place the best if you share a meal with nuns or monks at a monastery, right? When aren't you praying when you're at a monastery? But anyways, you're at the monastery and you're praying before you eat, but then when the meal is over, everyone stands and they pray after you eat. So in your program materials, I shared with you just an example of a before meal prayer and an after meal prayer. And I think what we want to try to do today is really focus on that after meal prayer. Now, I was recently giving a workshop in California, and the part of the lecture this part came up right before lunch. And so we all did our before meal prayer before the meal. And I said, okay, and after we get back, I'm going to lead us in our after meal prayer so we can try to get in this routine. So we all had our bellies filled. It was a wonderful meal. I got up to start talking again, and I just dived right into the talk. And then everyone started raising their hands, and they're like, aren't we supposed to do our after meal prayer? And I'm like, oh, goodness. That shows you how easy it is just to forget that. It's like our bellies are satisfied, and we're on with the 5 other things that we should do throughout our day. So I encourage you to try to start doing your after meal prayer. And let's say you finish dinner at 8 o'clock, okay? And you forgot to say your prayer. And 10 o'clock rolls around and, oh, let's say you're, I don't know, writing a letter to a friend. And you remembered that you forgot to say your after meal prayer. Say it right there. Because what's going to happen is that amount of time is going to become less and less when you forget to say it. And then it's going to become habit. But the important thing about that is it's taking this part of the day and allowing mindful eating to occur. We start our meal with prayer and we end our meal with prayer, and it makes that time of eating a sacramental act. It's almost as if we're having sacramental eating. So we know, and we hear in our prayers, God is everywhere present and filleth all things. He is at the table with us when we're eating. And so that is something that I really encourage you to start to try to do. In fact, we've seen this aspect of really honoring mealtime just throughout history. You know, other cultures might, bon appetit, for example, or there's always some sort of cheers before a meal. Something else I encourage you and challenge you to do is every time you're going to have something to eat, as much as possible, try to sit down. Research has shown it over and over and over again. Mindless eating occurs more at, kitchen counters or in front of the refrigerator and so on and so forth. But if we have sometimes the temptation to snack between a meal, we know we don't need a snack. In fact, I encourage people to try to make it at least 5.5 to 6 hours without food. So we were talking earlier that we live in a culture where we have breakfast and then a snack, and then lunch and then a snack, and then dinner, snack, 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 right? But allowing yourself to go for a period of time without food is a good thing. It allows us to start to use our own energy stores, our fat stores, to provide us with energy between meals. And in fact, if you're eating balanced meals with a lot of the foods that we've been discussing, you should be able to make it that long without food. A lot of times if you're doing a very, very low-fat, high-carb diet, you feel hungrier frequently because of the way they're processed in the body. And that goes back to what we were talking earlier as fat being our friend when we're utilizing it right. So just trying to be mindful of our eating practices and sitting down when we eat just makes us more aware of the act that is taking place, and that it is a sacred act. Just even, like I always tell people, we get to pick what we want to eat. We get to pick what we have as a snack. And so a lot of times when we're busy running around, we don't take the time to give thanks. But it is even more of a blessing because we got to choose that meal. So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so St. Maximus the Confessor gives us some advice when it comes to portion control. Nothing that God has created is bad in itself. Food is not bad, gluttony is. The procreation of children is not bad, lechery is. Wealth is not bad, avarice is. Glory is not bad, vainglory is. And he goes on and on. But we see this. Food is not bad. I always tell people, fat isn't bad, carbs aren't bad. It's what we do with these foods that can make them bad, or these macronutrients that can make them bad. So we have to keep things in balance. And as we were talking earlier, the evil one has many different darts that he throws and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, the size of foods and plates and everything just has grown. So what used to be the standard size of a bagel used to be, 3 inches. Now it's about 6 inches. So portion sizes have doubled. Back in the day, we were working for our food. We were kneading our dough. We were gardening. We were working on the farms and fishing out of the oceans and so on and so forth. Now we sit. So we're eating twice as many calories and we're sitting twice as long. Not the best recipe for us to kind of keep our calorie intake in balance. So when we look at this concept of eating in balance, we have to recognize that so much of it starts with how we serve ourselves. And research shows, in fact, there's a wonderful book entitled Mindless Eating by Dr. Brian Wansink. And he does a lot of research on why we eat, how much we eat, and so on and so forth. And he said, we live in a culture where we don't want to waste. It's been ingrained in us that people are starving other places, and we just don't want to waste, and that's a good thing. But as a result, we eat way too much. So he did a research study, and the end result of it is he showed that we eat about 92% of what's in front of us. And so a lot of this comes down to how we initially serve ourselves. Because if we put extra on our plate at the beginning, we're just going to eat it just because it's in front of us. So something to keep in mind is that we always need to portion out our plate with starting with less. You can always go back for more. But if you put a larger amount on your plate, you're probably going to eat it all just because it's in front of you. That expression that we all know, out of sight, out of mind, there's a lot of truth to that. And so a difficult thing, though, is when we're using bigger cups and bigger bowls. So, this, right? This is just, oh, look at that. And so then we move in, I know Starbucks, they have like their own language. But you see this, and then we see this, and then we see this, this. This is still bigger than a standard coffee you'd ever get in Italy. Our smalls in this culture are still bigger than standard sizes throughout Europe. So they have the food thing covered. They have some other things they need to work on, right? But they have the food thing down. But this used to be a standard juice glass. You can't even find these anymore unless you go to like the Goodwill or Salvation Army. There was another study that was done, and this is also in that book I just mentioned, and they asked antique dealers, what is one of the most common questions you get? And the antique dealers say, people will come up to us with a plate that they like the design, and they said, I would like to have this in the dinner size. Do you have it? And they look at it, well, this was the dinner size back then, right? So the average diameter of a plate has grown over an inch per decade. That's what we've seen happen. So in the 1960s, a standard 10-inch plate is over 12 inches in most of our restaurants. So when we look at this, we recognize that God created us, I truly believe, to enjoy our food. I truly believe that. Because, like was mentioned earlier, if we touch something hot, okay, we're able to pull our fingers away from that hot plate in milliseconds to prevent a major burn from happening. So the amount of time it takes for our pain receptors to send a message to our brain that, ouch, that's hot, milliseconds. But for the amount of time it takes for our stomach to send a message up to our brain that we're satisfied is what? Okay, see, we all know this, right? 15 to 20 minutes. So why are we eating our meals in 5.2 minutes? We know that it takes that long. Yet still, the forks are shovels, right? We're just go, okay, now I have to go on with my next 3 things of the day. It's because sometimes we just look at eating as another task versus as a time to commune with God. And so we're going to return to that. If you hold up your fist, a lot of times people look at that and they're like, okay, I don't believe it. But really, it's the average size of your stomach. Or at one point was the average size of your stomach, right? Just like any muscle, we can work our stomach. Or you go, you exercise, your triceps get nice and in shape. You can do that same thing with your stomach. Now, when you eat, a little bit of stomach distension is normal. That's going to happen. Different biochemicals are released. They send a message up to your brain, and so on and so forth. My mom told me she always knew I'd go into nutrition because I have just always loved this stuff. I love to be in the kitchen with her and so on and so forth. But I remember as a kid always thinking that there were these little people in my body. And I'd eat the food, and these people would do some work, and then they take it down to my stomach. Because I always heard, you know, okay, you get full in your stomach. But now through studying this stuff, I know I don't get full in my stomach, I feel it in my brain. And there's about 15 to 20 minutes for that message to go from my stomach to my brain that I'm satisfied. So the faster we eat, the more we eat. Now, it's interesting because when we look at how we should be eating, there's the ABCs, I like to call it the ABCs of eating. St. Gregory of Sinai gives us 3 areas of disciplining the body when it comes to eating. And he explains to us that abstinence is to remain feeling a little hungry after eating. Again, going back to what Cynthia was saying earlier, in these areas where we're noticing cultures that are very, very healthy, they don't eat until they're completely satisfied, right? A lot of times in America, we know when we're done eating because what's the big expression? Oh my gosh, I'm so full. Oh, I ate too much. That's when we know the meal's over, right? So adequacy. We neither want to feel weighed down or hungry. And then finally, satiety. And this is when we eat beyond the point of adequacy, okay? Our goal is to stay in the B range as much as possible. Now, we have some ABCs of our own to try to be here more than not. One is to choose the real foods. Like we've seen earlier, it's way more than just calories in versus calories out because some of these foods actually are chemically designed to make you crave more foods, not working in your favor, right? So we want to choose the real deal as much as possible. Eat like the apostles ate. Eat the foods that God made. The second part is listen to your body. And we're going to spend a little bit more time with how to serve ourselves, and then we're going to enter into this aspect of truly listening to our body. Again, what Marcia was saying, you know, a lot of times our body's giving us feedback all the time, but we just kind of tune it out. So we have to listen to our body. And finally, the 80-20 rule when it comes to eating. So let's first focus on this idea that less really does equal more. It's been shown over and over and over again, back to what I was talking about earlier with the head cook at the monastery. When food tastes good, there is this psychological aspect of eating that is met. If you're just eating rice cakes and celery, you're going to want to eat all the time. That stuff is just not satisfying. Again, that's why in fasting periods, a lot of times we feel hungrier more frequently because a lot of the satisfying foods are removed from our diet. And again, hunger is a good thing to feel, but I'm not going to keep you here till 7, so we'll talk about fasting another time. But look at this. Which black circle is bigger? The right or the left? Okay, so everyone's mostly saying the right. Believe it or not, they're the same size. Okay? And so it shows us how there can be so many things that we're easily tricked with. And as humans, again, we're using our over 12-inch size plates, right? And we're going to have some wonderful spinach for dinner, some fried rice, and a piece of plastic chicken. Doesn't this look delicious, right? Okay, and then now let's have a piece of fruit. But what happens? We still see some white space, or pink space, I guess I should say. So what do? Uh-oh. Yep. Oh, I can't eat that. That's too little, so we add some more, right? Until it's filled. But if we take this same amount of food, and a lot of us have already seen these tricks, and we put it on a smaller plate, okay? We look at that, there's not even any room for the fruit. We're like, wow, that looks like a lot of food. So going back to simply using smaller plates, smaller bowls, smaller cups, helps us in that initial aspect of eating the 92%. If we use the bigger plates, we're going to serve ourselves more, and the likelihood of us eating it all is likely to happen. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we're using these bigger utensils, means bigger bites, and that means we're going to eat faster. So trying to take smaller bites, use smaller utensils, that can make the difference. See, it's funny. My friends, they don't come over to my house and bring me flowers or chocolates. They come in like, Rita, look what I found for you. And so they give me these teaching tools and things like that. Or food labels. It's like no one ever shows up to my house without a food label, which is good because I don't have to buy this stuff, but it's good to use it as a teaching tool. So I should be giving thanks. Okay. Another thing we want to focus on, like I was mentioning earlier, is really cutting down on our between meals snacking. And I want to just share a teaching from a story from the Desert Fathers. A brother felt hungry at dawn and struggled not to eat until 9 o'clock. When 9 o'clock came, he made himself wait until noon. At noon, he dipped his bread and sat down to eat, but then got up again saying, I will wait until 3. At 3 o'clock he prayed, and he saw the devil's work going out of him like smoke, and his hunger ceased. I think this is a very relative teaching because we are not used to feeling hunger in this culture at all. As soon as we feel hungry, we run to the closest place that we can grab something. And we can eat everywhere these days, right? At the gas stations, at the post office, at the library. There's food everywhere. But I want you to think about it like this. Snacks are used to be a bridge between meals, okay? And so let's say you're truly hungry. You're really feeling hungry, and it's not just because you want to eat for appetite because you walked by a bakery and saw this wonderful pastry and all of a sudden you feel like you need to have it, right? You're truly feeling hungry. And dinner is going to be within a half hour. I would encourage you to wait it out. Even if it's going to be in an hour, it's good to try to wait it out. But if dinner's going to be something like 2.5 hours later, then that's an appropriate time for a snack. And again, in the resources that I'm going to send you, I'll send you a list of good snacks to use as these bridges. A funny story about this was I met a girl that was living in the States from Spain. And she met this guy, and they were going to get married. And so they were excited, and she's like, you got to come back to Spain, though. We got to meet the family and so on and so forth. So she takes her boyfriend back there, or fiance at this point, that was from Oklahoma. And they were walking around a lot in Spain, because that's what you do, right? You use your legs and you go everywhere. And so they were walking to her house, her mom's house, for dinner. And he said, oh my gosh, I'm so hungry. I'm just going to go in here and grab something. And she told me, Rita, I stomped my foot and I said, no. She said, my mom has been preparing all these wonderful foods all day. You can wait an hour to eat. And I thought, goodness, interesting to see how that's just ingrained in their culture, right? That you can wait it out. And so it's something very helpful for us. And the good thing is that when we fast, and we can even look at trying to not snack between meals as an aspect of fasting, we're going to feel hungry. And when we feel hungry, it's our bodies, it's a physical feeling that we feel in the body to turn us to prayer. that is really why it's important to feel hungry when we fast. Because when we fast, like Cynthia was using the quote, fasting without prayer is futile, right? So that physical feeling of being hungry is a physical reminder to drive us to pray more. So that's something to keep in mind. If you feel hungry, see if you can wait it out. Okay, another thing that we've gotten into is habit eating. And a lot of people do this. They've trained themselves now to eat by the clock. So they work in an office setting and they look and it's 2 o'clock and they're like, oh, time for my 2 o'clock snack, right? They're not maybe even hungry, but it's just become such habit to eat by the clock. Instead, we need to listen to our body. Another thing is that out of sight, out of mind. Many times people say, I buy a container of cookies, and if I leave it on the counter, all those cookies somehow develop voices, and before I know it, they're gone. And I'm looking around to say, who ate them, right? But if those cookies get put in the cupboard, a week later they're stale because I forgot they were in there. So this out of sight, out of mind really does work. But another thing I really encourage people to do is don't set yourself up for temptation. When we say the Our Father, we say, lead us not into temptation. We're asking God to help us to not fall into the sin that we continually, fall in. And God, in His wisdom, is saying, okay, I would gladly do this, but you got to work with me. If you know chips are a temptation for you, why are you bringing them into the home? People tell me I don't have any willpower. I'm like, well, I don't have any either, right? If I have all these things around me that tempt me and they're sitting right in front of me, it makes it that much harder. But if I create a barrier and not even have them in the home, it's easier for me to fight that temptation, to fight that passion. So that's something to keep in mind. And as much as possible, a good thing to do is to try to eat with people as much as possible. Now, that doesn't work for me a lot. A lot of my meals I have to eat by myself, and that's just the nature of how I live and my work and so on and so forth. So I always try to have some positive reading material at mealtime when I'm eating by myself. And that positive reading material becomes kind of like my friend. Another thing I do, I never had a smartphone, and now I'm like, wow, I could use it for so many different things. I'll FaceTime a friend that also eats by themselves. And so we're eating our meals together, exchanging stories and things of that nature. So these things can somehow, be beneficial. But again, we don't want to keep them to our ears and that whole thing like we just discussed. Okay, so another thing that we want to do is focus on listening to our body. And this is really where I want to spend some time now, because this is where we can really see a huge benefit in controlling portion size. So all the saints who watched over themselves strictly when it came to health and wellness and just caring for their soul say 4 things in unison. We see this throughout the Philokalia and many of the teachings of through our tradition. Very little is needed for satisfaction. We don't need a lot to be satisfied. But what we do need is real foods. It takes us back to that, vision of our fist, okay? So it's going to expand a bit, but we just kind of want to visualize that as much possible. So what we have to also realize is that very little is needed for satisfaction, but if the foods are real, then we're going to feel satisfied because they contain the nutrients that we need. They contain the iron, they contain the vitamin A, they contain the protein. If you're having something like this Crystal Light, there's nothing in here that your body needs. And so your body's like, okay, Rita, I understand that you just, drank this beverage or, again, ate this margarine, that really nothing's in here that your body needs. And so your body basically is kind of saying, I still need that vitamin A, I still need the iron, so it kind of goes looking for it in other ways. So real foods really do satisfy. So that's our first thing. Our bellies by themselves almost never know moderation. And this is so true. How many times you ate, you feel like you had enough, but then you feel like you could eat some more, right? You know it's going to be the over-the-edge bite, but we do it. So our bellies by themselves just never know when to say that next bite is going to be the over-the-edge bite. So we have to have our bellies and our minds communicating and working together. Our bellies sometimes demand food even when they've had more than enough. And if anyone spent any time with The Ladder of Divine Ascent by St. John the Divine during Lent, it's a book that's usually read during Lent among monasteries and among lay people also. He speaks a lot about this. He speaks a lot about how, the stomach is almost like a fire. And all it needs is one spark. And then it becomes inflamed, and it can eat and eat and eat beyond the point of satisfaction. So we have to be aware of that. And then finally, the saints tell us to maintain moderation when it comes to eating, we need to cease consumption of food when the urge of feeling satisfied is not completely met. So they're asking us to leave the table when we feel just a little bit underly satisfied. Now, how are we going to do this, right? The way we are going to focus on doing this is by slowing down our eating pace. Our goal is to not have the over-the-edge bite happen as much as possible. So we're going to kind of not let that happen as much as possible, okay? And so we know that it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for our stomach to send a message up to our brain that we're satisfied. Now, there is this company, and they have designed what is known as the Happy Fork, H-A-P-I. Has anyone heard of it? Okay, so for $99.99, you can have this shipped to your home, and there's the fork, and it comes with a USB in it and everything. And basically what happens is that if you're eating too fast, it zaps you. Ooh, you get zapped. You get zapped. So it's a real thing. It's out there. I saw it mentioned before it was released. And their whole concept was, you know, so many of our health problems are due to people eating too much. And the reason people are eating too much is because they're eating too fast. And so if you want to spend the $99.99 and get your Happy Fork, you can take this USB out and put it into your computer every week, and it tracks how your eating pace is going, if you're slowing down, speeding up, so on and so forth. Or for $0.00, you can actually take a bite of food, and if there's food in your mouth, you could put the fork down. It's your choice. I mean, sometimes, you know. But the thing is what we need to do is to create some strategies to slow down the eating pace. I have seen, believe it or not, so many people get off gastric reflux medication simply by slowing down the eating pace. Now again, there's a time and a place for medication, but like we've been discussing, the more we can do with lifestyle changes to not have to take the medication, the better, right? So many people. I worked with this man who was in the military, and he said, you know, Rita, we're in these mess halls, and it's like a gunshot, and we have to eat real fast. And he found it so hard to slow down his eating pace. But he was experiencing terrible gastric reflux and didn't want to get on medication. The condition subsided just by slowing down his eating pace. I've seen people lose lots of weight just by these techniques we're talking about, serving themselves less, taking their time with their food, and they realize, wow, I never thought I would be satisfied with that little amount. But because I'm eating slower, I let my body, my stomach and my mind communicate to reach the point of just being satisfied. So St. John Cashin kind of sums up a lot of the teachings of the fathers, and I think this is very important because he's emphasizing not everyone is the same age, strength, illness, or body. We all need different amounts of food. I know a wonderful woman who does triathlons and all this, and just watching her exercise stresses me out. I just don't see myself ever exercising on that level. She needs to eat way more calories than I do just because of her fitness level, okay? So we all need different amounts. Like I said, health can come at any size. We just have to make sure we're doing the right things for our body. But a single rule that we should all be doing is to stop eating while hungry and do not continue until you are satisfied. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to stay in that B zone. Just feeling like we didn't eat too little or that we didn't eat too much. Now, this takes us back to the 80-20 rule, right? There are going to be those days that we have that extra bite of steak or that extra bite of chocolate cake and we're like, oh, I did it. You know, in a way, I hope that happens to each one of you at one point after this talk. And it probably is going to. I know myself, and the bites has happened less and less, but still there are those times. It gives you feedback of what you don't want to happen more and more. So in a way, a fall can be a teaching tool. And if we fall, we get back up. If we don't learn anything from the mistake, then the mistake won. And so if these falls happen occasionally, it's one meal out of the 1,000, however many you're eating a year. It's one meal. So we have to kind of just recognize and be at peace with that. It happened, but I need to turn away from that. Why did it happen? It might just be, it was a party, you were talking, maybe you had a drink before and that kind of led to overeating, whatever it was. Try to figure out what caused it so that you have control of it the next time. This is from the Acathists of Thanksgiving, and I think this really provides some guidance for this mindful eating aspect. Glory to thee for each different taste of berry and fruit. I read that, and this was supposedly written from a priest that was suffering in the gulags. He was writing these praises of thanksgiving to God as he was suffering. And for him to say, glory to thee for every different taste of berry and fruit, how often do we really taste our berries? To taste all those flavors and take them in. God gave us our taste buds, again, as a way to be communing with him. And so we have to slow down enough to taste our food so that we have this experience. And again, it works just like we're saying. We're looking at the correct spirit when it comes to eating. And oh, by the way, my blood sugar has gone into better control. Oh, by the way, I've lost some weight. As opposed to that being the focus, as opposed to saying, I want to lose some weight, or I want to have better blood pressure. Maybe we should start to say, I want mealtime to be a time to be with God, to utilize it as a time of sacramental eating to work on attaining theosis. And then all those other things will just happen. Something else that I think is important about mealtime is really focusing on creating beauty at a meal. I always pose the question to people, if you were going to have Christ over to your house for dinner, what would you do to have that meal with him? What kind of menu would you choose? What kind of dishware would you want to serve the meal on? It's an exaggerated thing, but it is a neat picture to paint, because really he is there at every meal. And research shows that when there's clutter on the table, when the kids' homework is piled up, and there's a load of laundry, or there's a laptop computer, and all this busyness on the table, it causes us stress, and when we feel stressed, we eat faster. So, beautiful thing that monasteries do is they create a simplicity and a cleanliness around the mealtime table. And so we might want to think about how we can do this in our own environments. It might simply be putting some flowers on the table, or lighting a candle. Lighting a candle at mealtime just changes the whole dynamic of wanting to eat. Now, a lot of people say, okay, this sounds really nice and everything, but I have 3 meetings that I have to go to after dinner. I have to take the kids to soccer. I have this and that, X, Y, and Z. How am I going to carve out this time? But again, it was like we were talking about earlier. We have to choose the right foods because it's about our health. And we have to create the time to enjoy our meals because in the end, it's about our health. And when we care for our health, we're caring for our soul. It's body and soul alike. They're not separated. And so when we start to view eating time as an entertaining time, it's a time of day where we can talk to loved ones. If we live by ourselves, again, we could still talk to loved ones through possibly, using the phone, or just allowing it to be a time to de-stress by reading something positive. When we start to look at it in that way, we want to create that time for mealtime. I always tell people, eating is my favorite time of the day. So I try to make it as special as possible. I remember this job when I had to eat at my desk. And I didn't really like that, but there was no option. But I had a cloth, tablecloth that I would bring with me. I would clear all the clutter and I'd put out my tablecloth, and I wanted to light a candle, but I would have got fired, so I just brought a cloth napkin instead. But it helped me. It was like a signaling, using something physical to signal that this is a special time and I should honor it. And so I would have to type an email for a second, and then I'd take a bite, put down the fork, type a bit more, so on and so forth. So actually, in a way, the job helped me to slow down my eating pace. And by clearing the clutter, it allowed me to take that time in more of an enjoyable fashion. Okay, finally, I would like to share with you just a couple things. And we have a very hard time as Americans being in touch with when we're satisfied. Like I said, the research shows that we eat 92% what is put in front of us. So a lot of times the meal is over to us when the food is all gone, right? That's when we know the meal is over. That's when we know we've had enough. And there was a study that was done, and they were trying to determine why people stop eating. What is their signaling factor in America? And so what they did was this study called the bottomless bowl. And they had a makeshift restaurant set up, and they told college students that They wanted them to come in and taste this new soup and see if it was a flavor that they would like so that they could start selling it in the cafeteria. And so these college students were excited. They were getting a free meal. They walked into this fake restaurant and sat down. But what they really didn't know is the psychologists could care less, the food psychologists could care less if they actually liked the food. They wanted to know when they were going to stop eating. And so there was a group of people that just had a bowl of tomato soup that was just a bowl of tomato soup. And it was sitting on a tablecloth just like this. Another group had the same bowl of tomato soup, but there was a tube that was hooked to the bowl of soup. And every time they'd take a bite of soup, a little bit more soup would pop into their bowl. But they didn't know that this was happening. So they were eating and eating and eating and eating, and the soup never went away, and they just kept eating. And so afterwards, actually what the study showed was that the people that had the bottomless bowl ate 73% more soup than the people that just had the regular bowl. 73% more soup. And the food psychologist asked them, like, why did you, like, what were you thinking? How come you just keep eating? Like, well, I was just going to eat until the bowl was gone, right? As opposed to eating to the point that I feel satisfied, or that next over the edge bite, that was going to be it. They just ate until the bowl was gone. That's what they were going to do. And I guess one of the students was like, I thought that soup was a little heavy, though. I really thought it was a little heavy. And that's like, well, because you ate 73% more than anyone else in the room. So that's just something to keep in mind. We have to recognize that we have to listen to our bodies. And the only way we can listen to our bodies is by slowing down the eating pace enough to do that. So just the simple act of starting our meal with a prayer helps us to be mindful of the act that is about to take place. And so we see a lot of these teachings, again, only benefiting our health. Now, there was something that was started during 1917, during the era of World War I, when everything was, era of the Depression, everything was really, really expensive. And the president at the time, I believe it was Hoover, Herbert Hoover, he created this whole motto to help decrease food waste. And it was called the Clean Your Plate Club. And he really encouraged, children when they go to school, eat everything on your plate. It's the patriotic thing to do, because food was being rationed at the time. So many people that lived in that era, they don't know any other way to eat but to eat until everything is gone, okay? The reality of it is I always like people to think of food waste in this matter. If you're eating more than your body's needs, if you're taking those extra few bites because you don't want to waste the food, you're still wasting the food. But instead of throwing it into the rubbish can, you'll become the rubbish can, right? And so it's really hard to look at it like that, but it really does make sense. Eating beyond the point of satisfaction is still wasting the food. So it's in your best interest to pack it up in a glass container, right? And put it away, and it can be your appetizer maybe for the next meal. Or you could just choose to throw it away in the trash can. Just toss it, put it out. It's garbage, okay? You have that option. Because, again, if we keep every single time taking that over the edge bite, over the edge bite, over the edge bite, it's like our stomach muscle now stays this size. And then we need more food to be satisfied. Take the over the edge bite, over the edge bite, over the edge bite. So just as we've gotten our stomachs to be like this, we can get it back to this by using these techniques to train ourselves to be satisfied with less food. So as opposed to doing it so drastically and feeling like you have to cut your portions in half, start to think of just serving yourself a little bit less. So what I like people to visualize is this. If this is how much you usually serve yourself, okay? I don't want you to take off all your fingers and just give yourself your palm. But just think of taking away the top portions of your fingers, okay? I've been eating this way forever. And I tell you, when I'm really, really hungry, I just feel like I need to feed, all of Kentucky. I start piling on the food, and then I look around, I'm like, Rita, who is going to eat this? You know you're not going to eat this much food. So I always end up putting a little bit back. My auntie yesterday, she made one of my favorite meals on the planet, and I noticed I did it. I'm piling it on, And I said, oh, goodness, Rita. And I just, self-talk, talk to myself, put a little bit back. I ate it, and it was just the right amount. But I guarantee you, if I didn't pop that little bit back, I would have ate it, and I ate too much. And so many times we recognize that it is okay to enjoy our food, but enjoying our food really is about tasting our food. We don't enjoy that uncomfortable feeling of being stuffed, but we enjoy the way food tastes. And so we want to slow down enough to allow it to be a time to commune with God, to give thanks for the food, and just to eat to the point of feeling satisfied, not underly satisfied or overly satisfied. And this is a great teaching that I think can be another thing we try to practice to allow ourselves just to eat to that point. And so we're going to look at this teaching, and then we'll discuss just something small that you can do. At dinner, picture to yourself the image of our Heavenly Father opening His hand in order to feed you. Never omit your prayer before you eat, and leave some of your food for the poor. After dinner, consider yourself one of the 5,000 who were miraculously fed by Jesus Christ. Thank Him from your heart and pray that He not leave you without heavenly food, His Word, and most precious body and blood. And so, what I encourage you to do as a little take-home message is, if you feel you're one of those people that always clean your plate, and many times, you know, we do it more than we probably need to, okay? Try for this week just to consciously leave some bit of food on your plate and see what kind of feelings resonate and so on and so forth. Make it a mindful act of, you know, trying to, you know, pray for the poor, give alms to the poor through this act of eating in this fashion. But it's a really good training exercise to help us recognize that when we're satisfied, we're satisfied. And so it can just be something small to practice there. So again, like I mentioned, something I encourage you to do, though, is always keep that 80-20 rule in mind. That 80% of the time, you're eating clean foods, you're eating real. 20% of the time, things get a little off track. That's considered balance, right? Same thing with exercise. 80% of the time, you're doing regular movement. Okay, 20% of the time, things get off track. That's balance. 80% of the time, you're eating the amount of food your body needs, so on and so forth. 20% of the time, that's balance. Same thing with stress. 80% of the time, you're really managing your stress and so on and so forth. 20% of the time, things get a little bit haywire. Let's turn to our different tools that we can use, but that's keeping it more so in balance. Okay, well, thank you.